This brings me now to the first speaker of this second session. We'll have 3 short inputs on programs that support women's advancement in science and chemistry in particular. And the first speaker will be Professor Frank Baaijens from the Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. Frank was also the rector of that university between 2015 and 2023. And I think it was during that time that they launched a program to share, to increase the share of women faculty at their university. And if I heard it correctly, it was a slightly controversial program, but then also a very successful program. And we're looking forward to hearing about it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, thanks a lot for having me here, despite the fact that I have reached my mandatory retirement age. But it's a bit of a controversial program. I'm quite sure that it will be a little bit divisive in this audience as well. That's what I assume, at least. But let me try to explain why we have this program, how we got to it, and what the actual results are. Well, actually, looking back to your lecture, Lisa's lecture, it was striking to see how international it was. That was also observed by you. And that there was indeed a talent pool available of female talent. But the female talent pool was not tapped in the chemical engineering department. It took them more than 100 years to appoint 5 professors. That's what I just learned from you. So, and I'm not that patient, so I didn't want to wait that long. So we felt that we had to do something about it. And that's the Johanna Curie Fellowship Program. After we launched the program, I came across an editorial in The Lancet, and I've taken a few quotes from it. So this is The Lancet. So it's well established that women are underrepresented in positions of power and leadership, undervalued, and experience discrimination and gender-based violence in scientific and health disciplines across the world. If this would have been a statement from 100 years ago, from these first PhD candidates, we would all say yes. This is today. It's happening today. And I think many women must have experienced something like that. Whenever I talk to them, something like that has happened to them. So it's also happening to my daughters. It's happening to my wife, who is also a professor, and actually she recognizes this. So indeed, some studies also show that a more diverse and inclusive teams lead to better science. So simply using the argument that we want to have better science already is sufficient to do this. We cannot afford missing out on half of the intellectual power that we have in our population. And everything is unfair and all that, but even that argument should be sufficient to recruit more females in academia. And to have a lasting impact, something has to be done at the university scale, in my case. So institutional level change. There's a second interesting paper in Science. It's a completely different topic. But it shows that if you have a certain minority, and before the minority becomes a well-established entity, and is also part of the whole decision-making in an institution, you need to pass a threshold of about 25–30%. So that apparently is a sort of a minimum that you need to have before, in this case, females become part of the institution and also part of the decision-making in the institution. So that's where the 30% threshold that you will see later on in my presentation originates from. Now, how about gender diversity at my institution, but also in the Netherlands? These are a few, but at that time, almost all. To be honest. Look at this picture. There was a picture taken at the opening of the academic year. A typical picture at that time. Not that long ago. This was about 2018. The VIDI laureates, the VIDI program, they have a VENI-VIDI Vici program, is the equivalent of the ESC starting consolidator and advanced grant. This is the consolidated grant, if you like. 1 female. In the meantime, by the way, these were really highly talented people. All of them have become full professors, but this is a while ago. This is the situation that we have in the Netherlands. And this relates to full professors. So I need to make a precise definition of what I'm talking about. This is the Erasmus University. This is my university, if you like, Delft, Twente. So typically the engineering schools are not doing that well. It's like going across the street to the ETH in a way. And here you have all the other universities, Utrecht, Leiden, Maastricht, the Open University, and so forth. So there's clearly a trend in this graph. But it's about 15% of the full professors that we had were female. The Netherlands in particular is not doing all that well even in Europe. So if you look at the Swiss situation, where are you here? At that time, it was a little bit more than 20%. So we're at the tail end of, even on a national scale, I'm not looking at my institution, but on a national scale, we're at the tail end of what's happening in Europe. And in the natural sciences, the situation is really bad. And in engineering sciences. There's something else that struck me. There's one of the leading national newspapers that we have. They were looking at how many cum laudes there were granted to the PhD thesis. And we have a very specific way of granting the PhD thesis. Essentially, the promoter has to make a proposal whether or not to grant it, and then the others have to vote whether or not they agree with it. That's very susceptible to bias. That's exactly what you see. So we're almost twice as likely to grant it to the males than we do it to the females. Is that very probable? No. I mean, 30% of all our PhD candidates are female. There's one exception, and that is the University of Maastricht. It's almost at parity. And they have a completely different procedure, which takes out the promoter of the equation. The committee has to decide whether or not to grant the cum laude. So it's a completely different procedure. In the meantime, we are following that procedure. The other thing that's happening at the undergraduate level, today we have more females than males. This is already for quite a while like that. It's not just something that's happening, say, the last decade or so. This is really happening for quite a while. And if you move on in the academic ladder, you see that the number of females is decreasing. Part of it may be explained because it simply takes time to move from one position to the other. On average, in my university, it takes 18 years after graduation as a PhD to become a full professor. That's the average, and there's enormous variation, but typically about 6 years to get from assistant to associate, and then from associate, and so forth. But it cannot explain everything. So the assistant professor and the full professor level is really small. This is a situation that I had at my institution. We typically have about 30% of our PhD candidates is female. This is an engineering environment, so that may explain a little bit the situation. Also, about 30% of our undergraduate students today is female. Would I like it to be 50%? Absolutely. But it's difficult to get there. And we need actually female faculty to make that change. So we've made many attempts to increase the number of female faculty for 15 years in a row. Not just me, but also my predecessor they've taken all sorts of initiatives. Specific Women in Science program, annual targets to the deans. Did they actually comply with them? They were very reluctant to comply with it. The only way you can get the deans if you make it financial, but try to make it financial, it's almost impossible. 50% targets and so forth. The other thing is we've always thought that by increasing the number of female faculty in a hiring process, so in the committees, that would solve the problem. It doesn't. It didn't, at least not in our case. And why is that? Well, I was invited to a meeting, a small meeting, with one of our Royal Academies of Science. We actually have two. It was a relatively small meeting with university representatives, but also our Minister of Education. And one of the top-notch scientists that we have in the social scientists, Elmers, presented her work on why there is this disparity in the way we look at males and females. And there was one thing that stood out during that meeting. That is implicit gender bias. The way we perceive excellence in males is very different from the way we perceive excellence in females. And if you ask a large body of students, say 50,000 students, and you ask them, who's your most excellent teacher? The majority, and it's a 50-50 parity, males and females in this body of students. The majority will gravitate towards a male candidate. And this is exactly what's also happening when we do evaluations, when we hire people and we look at people, and we go for the best people. Implicitly, and we are not even aware of it, we gravitate to the male person. Females as well. It's not just a male issue. So females. So having more females in the recruitment procedure didn't really help. So I wanted to take this implicit gender bias out of the equation. That was essentially the experiment. Because they also always said, yeah, there are no female candidates available. They're not there. I thought, how can that be? I mean, there's an enormous amount of people. How can that be? Yeah, they're not there. Okay. So we also had an opportunity. Because we had, for all sorts of reasons, lots of retirements, but also growth of the university, we suddenly had, in a relatively short period of time, 150 vacancies. So we could make a difference. And the target was that we would have at least 30%, in the long run, 30% of our professors, assistant associates, full professors should be female. That was again, this is the 30% threshold that I mentioned before. Eh? So if we would exceed the 30%, the idea is that the system would take care of itself. At least that's the hope that we have. And this program initially would last between 19 and 14. And in the meantime, it has been extended. This was the idea. The first 6 months, only females could apply to a vacancy. And you could only interview females in that period of time. If in that period of time, because then that's a way to exclude the implicit gender bias. So it's not a quotum. Many people have taken it as a quotum. It's not a quotum. If in that period there was not a suitable candidate, you could open it up and follow the procedures we always done. That was the idea. And there was an opt-out rule. So we said, yeah, clearly, I mean, sometimes you have this very special candidate, and no matter what, you want to hire that particular person. So we had about 10% of the vacancies, they could come to me, and I had a committee, and if they had a special candidate. So how often did that happen? Any idea? So a special candidate. Once. Remarkable, eh? Because they could evade all of this if they wanted to, if they had a really outstanding candidate. Didn't happen. Now, clearly, we wanted to make a bit of procedures, and on top of what they got from the departments, they also got something from the central government, central agency that we had, and so forth. So there are a lot of other things that we do to make it, to embed the whole program, and I think many of the fellows that we have hired really appreciated the fact that we were paying attention to them. That's the other thing that I learned. When you hire individuals, certain departments say, oh, there's your chair. Please, go and sit and make the best of it. That's a tough cookie. Other departments say, please, I will help you. I will try to identify what is your research identity, and we need the research funding, and we're going to help you, and you become part of the community immediately. That's a very different approach. Now, actually, I thought this is going to make the local newspaper. It exploded. This took me completely by surprise. So it was all over the news, everywhere. I mean, no matter where you're going, everyone was talking about it. And I had to defend it on national television. I even had to defend it in Parliament and so forth. So a lot of things were happening at the same time. It received praise. I mean, some people say, yeah, that's a very interesting initiative. It's about time that we do something. At least it kicks the whole thing. But clearly, I mean, I don't know what the division in this audience is, but there was also a large pool of people that said, yeah, impossible. You cannot rule out these men. Essentially, that's what they say. Because you have to go for the best scientist. I agree with that. That's what we've been doing 100 years. But because of the implicit gender bias, we always go to the males instead of the people that are really good. End result. 50-50 hiring. That was good. I was happy with that. So we're not excluding males. These females have been hired because they were qualified, because they wanted to have these females. But otherwise, they would have waited for a couple of months. So, I mean, I don't know what you do if you recruit a faculty member. A half a year, it's not that long, at least not these days. So 50-50. So we see a significant acceleration in the number of females that we have in the university. But we were called to court. So I had a couple of interesting sessions with lawyers and so forth. Anyway, they felt that we had gone a little bit too far by putting all the vacancies in the program. So we agreed upon the following. You can apply it in those areas of your university where you still haven't met this 30-35% threshold. That would be a bit more specific. And you can only do it with 50% of the eligible vacancies. So not all vacancies. So it became a little bit less of a biting program, if you like. It's easy to evade it. Anyway, it's the way it is. We now still have the program, and it still helps, I think, in recruiting, because this is what we have in 22. It's still almost 50-50. Because it also changed the minds of all these people in the departments. They start to realize, hey, we can hire very good female candidates. So that has changed the mindset, I think, in my university. So it's growing, and I think we're close to 30% to date. The ambition was to hire more full professors. That is very difficult and very expensive. We were not able to do that. So most of the new hires are assistant professors. So the ambition obviously is also to have more associate and full professors. That will take time, simply because these assistant professors have to go through their career steps to reach the full professorship level. Okay, the other thing that we did, because there was some information from another university, that there was a significant pay gap between males and females. But if that's that's an easy to solve thing, in principle. So we did the analysis. We couldn't prove it. With an external agency, we were unable to prove it at my university. So I was happy with that, actually. But it was done by an independent agency, not something that we did ourselves. A pretty complicated analysis. And the other thing is, which I also find very reassuring, at least in my university, in the medical department, this is completely different. But at least in the engineering school, you see that the time it takes for individuals to go through all the different promotions is there's no significant difference between males and females. So I'm happy with that. So once again, things are okay. So they all said, they're not good enough. These are our ESC Consolidator and Advanced Grants of 2022. 50-50 almost. How can they say they're not good enough? They're not there. This is the most recent thing that we have. This is the Dutch starting grant, if you like. It's 50-50. And many of them have been hired through the Irene Curie Fellowship Program. So this whole thinking that many had, they're not there, they're not good enough, blah, 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 it's not true. I hope that they start to realize that that is not true. I know many of them, incredibly talented, incredibly talented. So I'm really proud of that group. Okay, summary. I think it has been a very controversial program. I'm sure some of you have the thoughts about it as well. But it worked. So we now have a sustained 50-50 hiring. So it's not just an initial situation where we had obviously this opportunity because of this large number of vacancies, but it's a sustained development that we now have initiated within my institution. Before that, it was roughly about 20% female hires. So now we're having 50-50. The thing that is really critical, in my case, is the commitment of the deans. So I was able to commit most of the deans, with the exception of one. I can show you the detailed results. 2 of them have now retired and someone else has come into their place. They are not committed. And immediately see a reversal of this phenomenon. That's sad, isn't it? So the target is the same. And the adjusted program now has the approval of the Human Rights Committee, which means that all the legal actions have basically vanished at this point in time. It's nothing anymore. With that, thank you so much.